Okay. Oh, sure. I might as well. Okay. So, okay. Sorry about that. Classroom technology. Um, drugs, of course, are great, right? We've already discussed that about all these different drugs that you can take. Some of them are illegal. Some of them are legal, but you need a prescription, and then you can sell them on the street. Right? Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. So as I mentioned, both legal and illegal drugs can act on the same neurotransmitter, but the dynamics are different. So dopamine, Ritalin, cocaine, meth works on the dopamine pathway. LSD, ecstasy, Prozac, Zoloft works on the serotonin. And addiction has to do with certain properties. Okay. What?
We already went through.
We did.
Yeah.
Oh.
We're on the last slide.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I want to talk to you. It turns out we didn't get this recorded because there was trouble with the lecture capture that day. So, we've talked about Toxo, and we've really kind of talked about parasites, which use the host to reproduce. Most parasites, well, a lot of parasites don't kill the host, but they certainly lower their fitness. Toxo is a single cell eukaryote. That means it's got a nucleus, organelles, all that kind of stuff. It can alternate between asexual and sexual reproduction. The definitive host is actually a cat, where that's the only place that sexual reproduction is done. Now, in terms of asexual reproduction, it can reproduce in many warm-blooded animals. However, usually Toxo is not very serious, but it can change the behavior of an intermediate host, non-cat, specifically rodents. So rodents with T. gondii, Toxo, are attracted to cat odors and have slowed reaction times. So rodents infected with T. gondii, there's some changes in their mental apparatus and behavior. Specifically, one thing that Toxo does is it affects dopamine levels. It also affects sexual pathways in the rodent's brain. And so the rodents are actually attracted to cat odors because they act more like an aphrodisiac. In other words, they want to have sex with the cat, which is basically suicide by cat. Of course, this certainly helps in getting the parasite back into the primary host. Of course, it loses fear, and it also finds cats attractive. So they get eaten rather quickly. So they kind of take over the the mouse or rat's brain, which is a fairly common thing among parasites. For the toxo to be successful, it has to get back into the cat. And it does this by infecting the brain of its secondary hosts, including humans, but most prominently the food of cats, which are rats and mice and things like that. And it does this by taking over their brains and mind control. So T. gondii carries genes that are required to synthesize dopamine, which makes the cats lose any fear that they have. And it can affect mammalian neurons, increase dopamine levels as well. And furthermore, as I mentioned, there's some evidence that it can affect the sexual pathways in cats. And so it makes the cats, or it makes the mice and rats, consider cat smells like urine to be an aphrodisiac. So they want to mate with cats. Okay. Of course, there's a blood-brain barrier that's a problem, but T. gondii manages to get into the brain because it can travel through our cells, not just between them. So, toxo in humans is generally not a serious disease unless an individual is immunocompromised or a fetus gets infected during pregnancy. So we get T. gondii from eating infected animals, undercooked pork, things like that, and also from cat litter. So if you're pregnant, you shouldn't empty the litter. Let someone else do it. But there's also some evidence that T. gondii infection can affect human behavior, our behavior. It was thought previously that T. gondii infections were in the brain, were insisted by our immune system, and that it basically held these parasites in kind of dormant state forever. But it doesn't appear to be the case now. Occasionally they actually come out, perhaps most often in individuals who are, let's say, immunocompromised, but not necessarily, and they actually undergo asexual reproduction. So there's a bunch of correlative but convincing studies that show how T. gondii infection actually affects our behavior. There's gender-specific effects. In other words, men are different than women. Men tend to make men more jealous, stubborn, rule-defiant. That sounds like men anyway, so who knows? Men tend to be more likely to, disregard rules. They're also more likely to get into car accidents. Women with toxo make them warm, outgoing, moralistic. Well, perhaps women are already this way, not necessarily moralistic. But it also appears to make them more sexually receptive. So, what are some hypotheses that might explain these observed correlations? How would you take these correlations and do an actual experiment that tests the hypothesis that T. gondii can affect our behavior? Well, if it wasn't for ethics, we could do it pretty easily. We'd infect some people with T. gondii, and we'd have a control group that were not infected. And we'd follow those subjects for a while. And we could look at, first of all, brain scans with functional magnetic resonance, MRIs, or we could also look at transmitter levels and see exactly what's going on there. Appears that 20% of the U.S. population is infected with T. gondii, probably cat lovers. Does this make us less responsible for our, let's say, weird quirks? Well, no one's tried, I think, to pawn this off on T. gondii, but it's possible. Now, another thing that is correlated with T. gondii in humans is an increased incidence of schizophrenia or schizophrenia-like disease. Auditory hallucinations, paranoid delusions, disorganized speech. Normally, schizophrenia is typically occurs in early adolescence, adulthood. So, I mean, T. gondii might cause some schizophrenia levels, but not necessarily all of them. There's always, it's kind of like I said, an adolescent, early adulthood onset. So there's something else going on there. Now, symptoms like these can be alleviated by drugs that decrease dopamine signaling, but I don't know if anybody's tried that. Obviously, there's genetic and environmental influences, like genetic background, the early development. Perhaps stress can bring, schizophrenia on. And in fact, stress oftentimes affects immune systems. So, for example, shingles is a virus. It usually is latent in neurons, but it sometimes does show up in individuals who have a lowered immune system, let's say from stress. So perhaps the same thing is going on with T. gondii. So, T. gondii infection might actually be correlated with this, but we don't really, we have some, it's correlational data, like I said. So we can't really do an experiment. So we could say a correlation, people who are infected with T. gondii are more likely to have schizophrenia, or more likely to be in traffic accidents than unaffected men, right? That's perhaps that's a hypothesis that we could test, though it's hard because, like I said, we've got ethics problems. So men infected with T. gondii are 6 times more likely to be in traffic accidents than unaffected men. But, there's a lot of other things that could be happening. We could say, though, that there certainly seems to be a strong correlation between gondii infection and risk-taking behavior and losing your cool, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if having a risk is more likely to lead to T. gondii infection. I seriously doubt that. Here's another mind-controlling parasite that I want you to look at. This is a fungus that takes over the brains of ants and actually other things as well. It's called cordyceps. There's many different kinds. So here we go.
These bullet ants are showing some worrying symptoms. Spores from a parasitic fungus called cordyceps have infiltrated their bodies and their minds. Its infected brain directs this ant upwards. Then, utterly disorientated, it grips a stem with its mandibles. Those afflicted that are discovered by the workers are quickly taken away and dumped far away from the colony. It seems extreme, but this is the reason why. Like something out of science fiction, the fruiting body of the cordyceps erupts from the ant's head.
Oh shit! Earlier I mentioned other animals get infected by parasites that take over the brain, like rabies for, mammals and things. Here's an example of a fungus that infects the brains of these bullet ants, but they infect the brains of all kinds of other insects as well. So here we go.
These bullet ants are showing some worrying symptoms. Spores from a parasitic fungus called cordyceps have infiltrated their bodies and their minds. Its infected brain directs this ant upwards. Then, utterly disorientated, it grips a stem with its mandibles. Those afflicted that are discovered by the workers are quickly taken away and dumped far away from the colony. It seems extreme, but this is the reason why. Like something out of science fiction, the fruiting body of the cordyceps erupts from the ant's head. It can take 3 weeks to grow, and when finished, the deadly spores will burst from its tip. Then, any ant in the vicinity will be in serious risk of death. The fungus is so virulent, it can wipe out whole colonies of ants. And it's not just ants that fall victim to this killer. There are literally thousands of different types of cordyceps fungi, and remarkably, each specializes on just one species. But these attacks do have a positive effect on the jungle's diversity, since parasites like these stop any one group of animal getting the upper hand. The more numerous a species becomes, the more likely it will be attacked by its nemesis, a cordyceps fungus.
Okay, that's that. Here's a little short clip on toxo.